Hey guys, it's Sick Greek here. I'm just recording this voiceover audio because I recently discovered some things online and I didn't really have the time to think and reflect on them enough to do whilst I was live out on the road. So I've just taken some notes down here while I've got 5-10 minutes free. I just wanted to talk about a couple of things. I recently discovered a bloke online called Gary Stevenson. He's actually a pretty interesting figure in terms of economic discourse. He basically grew up as and I should preface this all by saying his YouTube channel is Gary's Economics. It's like one of the biggest exploding YouTube channels over recent last few years, just in regards to the wealth inequality in the world and stuff like that. Anyway, let's just have a quick synopsis on his YouTube channel. Basically, he was a working class kid from East London. He basically became a millionaire trader working for one of the biggest banks in London. Some people have even claimed that he was whatever bank he worked for, he was literally the top trader there or something like that, earned the most money for the bank. Anyway, he grew up in Ilford, which was a lower class area of London. Apparently, I'm not as an Aussie who's never been to the UK, I have no idea about London or whatever. Anyway, he got expelled from school at 16 for a drug related incident, but he was really good at mathematics. Apparently he went to the London School of Economics because he was that good, and he became some kind of trader for a bank or whatever, an economist or whatever you want to call it. He's basically a really high paid person working for a bank because he's essentially making him a lot of money. Anyway, his whole stick is that a lot of rich people his whole stick is that whilst he was earning a lot of money, he could just see the growing problem and growing trend, which is wealth inequality. And basically, he made a lot of his money essentially betting that things are going to get worse for the middle class, essentially. His central thesis is basically, to summarise it, is that extreme wealth inequality is the root cause of our economic malaise. Okay, that's what he says. I think that's potentially a direct quote. He said, the ultra rich don't spend the wealth and they hoard it in assets like property and stocks or whatever. This does sound quite malicious, but realistically, when you think about it, if you're a billionaire or 100 million or whatever, the people that he's basically talking about, you kind of wouldn't really have a chance. If you're talking about responsibly managing your wealth, you wouldn't really have much of an option apart from investing it in essentially assets that are going to grow and provide returns and passive income and stuff like that. So realistically, you can't essentially blame the billionaires for just trying to responsibly manage their wealth, although some of their business practices you could say is quite, unethical and whatever. We can get into that debate later, but basically what I think he gets right is he really deserves credit for making economics accessible and highlighting real problems that mainstream economists seem to ignore, mainly because maybe they're still out there making money off these problems being ignored or whatever. Anyway, his explanation of how quantitative easing is primarily benefiting asset holders, which is basically what the government tried to essentially sell to Australian people, that it's okay, we're just going to do quantitative easing during COVID. That was another point in history that he points to as that he made a lot of money off, because essentially the cheap money flows to those who already have access. They inflate the price of a house without boosting the broader economic activity. Just please go to his YouTube channel and watch some of his videos. He breaks it down way better than I could possibly even interpret or explain. And he's very relatable because he essentially came from what I would consider a lower middle class household, knowing what it was like to grow up with not much really. And he's made a real big, great life for himself and his family. But he basically thought, fuck, this is he's witnessing basically what everyone in the world is witnessing. This is not a problem that's affecting just Australia or just your city or your country, whatever. Every single place in the world is broadly having these issues, which is the shrinking middle class getting essentially pushed harder and harder. And what's the solution really is what I want to know. And I think realistically, Gary points towards taxing the wealthy or whatever, but I think you have to be a little bit more nuanced and specific as to how that would work. Anyway, some of the things he does make a lot of good points, but some of the things he seems to dance around or not really adequately explores. Basically, how the rich control the media narrative. He doesn't really explore how billionaire ownership of major news outlets fundamentally shapes economic discourse. The concentration of media ownership amongst the ultra wealthy is essentially creating an information ecosystem that naturally resists wealth distribution, and they're basically just essentially creating their own narrative. Don't do this tax because it's effectively going to affect my bottom line, but I'm going to spin it and make it sound like it actually affects you, the fair-paying tax person. One of the things that I agree with pretty much everything Gary says. Like, he's identified like a major problem that's just been trending essentially since the post-World War II boom, where the middle class were able to, like the average working citizen worldwide was able to attain assets at an affordable rate and build a better life for themselves. He seems to point at like, we just need to get these guys to we need to work together to figure out a way that we can fairly tax the billionaire class essentially. But he rarely discusses how certain deregulations could boost productivity and economic growth. And his analysis, I find, often assumes more government intervention is always better, without recognising how captured regulatory agencies can serve incumbent interests rather than public welfare. So you do need a reform with taxation, but it would be nice to hear if he could, address campaign finance reform, lobbying restrictions, like other things like democratic reforms that might be prerequisites for meaningful wealth taxation. Anyway, we need to address as well how billionaires buy political influence. It's a big issue. You have to attack it from all sides. But what I really do like about him is he's drawing global attention to this. Basically, like every Western country can relate to what he is pumping out. And I think that's incredibly important in today's day and age. Apart from that, like, what can we do? And realistically, as you, the individual, you can't do much, but you can get this information out there, tell your friends and family about Gary, let people watch his interviews and debates and make up your own opinion about it. But realistically, what I find quite interesting is he seems to be given a bit of clout from the elite media or the more mainstream media of the world. I think he's been on Piers Morgan's show as well, and I feel like because he's not just he's pointing out the problems in society essentially, but as a person who might be labelled as the average person as contributing to that problem. Like, he's easily a multi-millionaire and he's done very well for himself, but I think it gives him more credibility being quite a wealthy, like, self-made person like that, actually pointing out the hypocrisy and the problems in society, and it generally makes them feel more genuine than just someone that actually has nothing and is happy to point out all the problems that they've essentially not done anything about it. So, I don't know. He seems like a pretty complicated individual, but I think he honestly touches on what everyone in the middle class worldwide is feeling, which is that we're heading down a road of decay and for the foreseeable future. And realistically, like, if you're upper middle class, whatever, you're earning good money, you're an entrepreneur, whatever it is, you're probably going to be feeling not really the effects of this. But it's going to get to the point where eventually your kids or your kids' grandkids or whatever, they're going to be affected by it. And you really have to act now and try change the narrative and change the trajectory of where we're going as a society. But anyway, I did a bit of research anyway and just see like realistically, let's say the entire world instantly agreed to do what Gary is suggesting and do some sort of wealth inequality reform. Because he argues in the post-World War II era, the entire world was essentially affected by, like, pretty much every country was affected in some way by World War II, whether it be loss of life, resources, land, whatever. It affected the entire world. So coming out of World War II, there was like a unique opportunity for everyone to grow, wealth to be redistributed, and what actually ended up happening is a big, well-built middle class was essentially formed, and that's it. I'm sort of like summarizing his explanation of it, but anyway, some of the points I managed to find was that basically billionaire wealth has grown from 3% to 13.5% of global GDP over the last 4 decades. And some projections are suggesting this could reach up to 20% with the next decade without intervention. So, I don't know. I don't think this is right. Based on extensive analysis of current proposals and economic research, this is a bit of a rough framework as what could actually be done potentially to address the wealth inequality. Basically, there's a chap named Gabriel Zuckman. He had a blueprint for coordinated minimum taxation standard. So basically, from what I understand, this would basically require ultra-high net worth individuals with over $1 billion in wealth to pay a minimum effective tax rate of 2% of their wealth annually. You can debate on that, whatever. Like, because a lot of the time the argument is like, well, if you're a billionaire, you wouldn't want to get taxed this amount of money. But if you freaking earn like $100 million in passive income in a year, or $1 billion, whatever, this crazy amount of passive income in a year, you're going to end up just reinvesting it because you don't need that amount of money. Like, you don't need $100 million in your bank account or whatever, however it works. So you end up reinvesting it. Anyway, you can watch Gary's videos. I don't want to go and like essentially just say what his content says. I want you guys to make your own mind up about it. But basically, countries could achieve some sort of minimum taxation through whatever various domestic instruments, including presumptive income taxes, broad-based income taxes, or direct wealth taxes. There have been times in the past where there's been like an inheritance tax, but means tested based on like you'd have to basically look at a comparison of like who is the top 0.1% or whatever, and measure what their net wealth inheritance is, and tax a tiny little portion of that. Basically, a 2% global minimum tax on billionaires worldwide would basically generate up to $250 billion annually from approximately only 3,000 taxpayers, which would, I'm pretty sure, just to put that in perspective, that would I think our deficit in Australia is less than like $50 billion or something this year. So like, not even a tiny amount of that would be enough just to essentially fix the entire, fix in quotes, the entire budget of Australia. But extending this to centimillionaires would add another 100 to 140 billion. This actually shows you, if you're only talking about billionaires, a 2% minimum tax would potentially nearly generate $750 billion. And extending that to, 100 millionaires, 200 millionaires, whatever, that would only add another 100 to 150 billion dollars. It actually kind of shows you where, how tiny little tax. Like, can you imagine as an income earner in any country that you were only paying 2% tax on whatever wealth you generated, and like that would be enough to essentially fix a lot of world's problems. Anyway, beyond the billionaire minimum, definitely a progressive wealth tax structure would have to include graduated wealth tax rates. A bloke named Thomas Piketty, I think if I'm saying that right, he said you can implement rates from 2% on wealth above 5 million to potentially 8% to 10% on extreme wealth concentrations. An Australian model would suggest that 2% wealth tax on assets above 5 million could raise $41 billion annually. Now, I think whatever law that would have to be put in place would have to be like means tested every year and keep pace with whatever inflation, CPI, you name it, so that essentially it doesn't creep down to the middle and lower classes. But realistically, apparently like you could reintroduce inheritance taxes with high exemption thresholds. So you could just go like, what is the top 1% of salary earners in Australia earning? Or maybe that's like a football player or a freaking CEO or whatever, and they're earning like 5, 10, $20 million a year, you name it. Like, okay, well, maybe so if you're earning more than literally the highest paid salary earners, maybe you do like an inheritance types tax on that, where, anyway, it's theorized you could essentially raise up to 10 billion annually from modern inheritance tax, while maintaining still intergenerational wealth transfer opportunities for middle class families. Capital gains tax reform potentially could, add another $19 billion annually. Look, I actually don't like the idea of just adding more taxes as a solution to everything, especially like when it comes to myself. But a lot of people find it hard to believe that billionaires don't essentially pay any income tax historically. But then you could argue like, oh, but do they generate wealth for the economy by having businesses here and this and that? And that is true to some extent. But at the same time, what is going to happen if this is left unchecked is that, like, if you just look into infinity, what's going to happen is you're just going to have a growing, continuous amount of the wealth just focused down to, like, essentially, like, maybe, like, handfuls of individuals in every country. And then you're going to have a populate. Like, what are you going to do with everyone else? Everyone's just going to eventually shrink down towards abject poverty and not potentially have great working conditions. And at the end of the day, like, you need every person in society to function. If you're a billionaire or whatever, rich person, you need every person in society to be having a meaningful and functional life for you to enjoy all the things that you hold dear. Because if there's nobody in the middle class earning money for your services and products or whatever, then how you can not even going to be able to reap the rewards of your own business opportunities, essentially, or productivity. The other thing as well is I think this is all going to lead towards a global, not just in Australia, but a global population collapse. Because if the middle class of every country in the world feels like it's just impossible to have kids because kids are so expensive and life is so expensive, the no-brain thing is just going to be, well, fuck, I can't afford to have kids, so I might only have one kid. I might not even have any kids because, fuck it, things look so bleak. I can barely take care of myself, let alone another mouth to feed. My question is, what is the controlling class going to do when there's literally no population anywhere in the world to produce the shit they need? I think this is the biggest issue that people aren't talking about. It's like eventually this is going to potentially lead to the decline of human population worldwide. Obviously, you can't extrapolate, far into the future, but you essentially want to steer things in the right direction. And at the moment, I don't think we are steering in the right direction. And we saw especially through COVID, like just the amount of wealth that was transferred during that. And people, it's not like changing hands directly, but anyway, go check out Gary's Economics on YouTube. So many tiny little videos that you'll be able to watch just to see what's going on. Anyway, Australia is a very rich country. We've still got lots of assets and natural resources and whatever, always the biggest fear is like, oh, okay, if we tax out natural resource companies, they're just going to take their business elsewhere. Oh, really? Are they going to just rip all the gold out of the ground, the oil, the gas, you name it, and just take that with them as well? Because they fucking can't do that because it's fucking still buried in the ground here. Like, really? And just look at Norway. That's exactly what they did, and now they've built like a sovereign wealth fund for their country because they just told the natural resource companies to piss off and go somewhere else. And then they came back and said, oh, I guess we can work with you and we'll give you some tax, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And now they've got a pretty big kitty there that they can use for their sovereign wealth. And just to put it in perspective as well, like, this is an issue that's like Australia, this is like low-hanging fruit for the Australian government if they actually want to make a difference. The Albanese government allocated an extra $200 million per year to strengthen the Australian Tax Office compliance operations, which includes the Tax Avoidance Task Force, and that's basically specifically to address corporate tax compliance, give them more resources to police that type of stuff. Anyway, this funding commenced from the 22 to 23 budget, and it's been extended further into subsequent years. But basically, it was an additional $200 million per year was targeted at increasing the capacity of the ATO to scrutinise large corporates, multinational enterprises, and wealthy individuals in Australia. Okay, the ATO, from that small, in quotation marks, $200 million investment, received $97 billion in corporate income tax from the large corporates, which was up 16.7% from the previous year, when the amount raised by the Tax Avoidance Task Force included the ATO collections from large corporates, were approximately $100 billion in that year. So basically, for a $200 million investment, they got a 16.7% increase in tax revenue. So it paid itself off well and truly. Essentially, now from 2025. The ongoing extension is apparently, this is according to the ATO's figures, it's just in this year apparently alone, in 2025 to 2020. Oh, it says, apologies, I misread that. It says as of 2025, the task force compliance secured an extra $5.7 billion. So the long story short is like, this is like low-hanging fruit out here, and it's like a step in the right direction. You don't have to say, oh, we're going to just tax billionaires, we're going to do... Fucking just start with the bloody multinational corporations that have been eating a free lunch on behalf of the Australian public for the last... well, for basically forever, but at least the last 50 years. And that's at least going to be a step in the right direction, giving more funding to the government, to the Australian people. You know, if the government had more money... Let's say the government had more money than than what was required for the budget or whatever, like a significant amount more money, like, well, then the government can start doing some of the things that these billionaires are doing and start investing in property, whatever you name it, public infrastructure. They could just start buying property so that the middle class and lower class don't even have to do it. But anyway, that's just like a bit of a wild take there. And all this factors on the government essentially doing the right thing and not being corrupted. And there's even, look, there's news in that realm that's more positive as well. I believe, I forgot what his name is, there's a guy who runs a YouTube channel called Punters Politics. I believe he's been given a lobbying pass to government, I think on behalf of Senator Pocock. I believe Senator David Pocock, whatever his name is, he did a whole speech to Parliament recently saying how he's given these kind of journalists access to lobbying passes to essentially get to potentially make a lobby on behalf of the middle class of Australia in Parliament, rather than just having multinationals, big business be the lobbyists. Actually, you know what, we're going to give some people to essentially lobby on behalf of the middle class. So anyway, that's good news. I'm hoping there's going to be more of that, because in reality, what people don't realise is, go back to that other number, 3,000 billionaires worldwide, you know? 3,000 billionaires worldwide. Do you know how many people are in the world? Like over 7 billion now, or something like that? Yeah, outnumber these people more than thousands of times more people than there are billionaires, okay? So just let your voice be heard, and look, do your own research. Don't believe what I'm saying or whatever. Like, fucking take what I'm saying and sit down and do 5 minutes research and see if there's any lick of truth to it. And hey, I'm happy to hear where I might have got things wrong. I'm happy to hear everyone's take on this, because I don't want it to be something as simple as like, the solution shouldn't be something as simple as, oh, we just need to tax billionaires and everything's going to be okay. I think it's going to be a multi-nuanced solution with many different things that everyone's going to have to do worldwide. It's going to be like global politics. But the thing that really astounded me is that even the Chinese, the people that all our governments in Western world saying, oh, there's China, we've got to be careful what China's doing, they're having the exact same problem, you know, a middle class that just can't afford to live. And you know, they've got 1 billion people there, so you know, it'll be interesting to see what happens in China when 1 billion people start getting fed up. I mean, you saw what was happening in Hong Kong even before. Hong Kong's obviously not China, right? Whatever, but you saw what was happening there before the COVID. You know, they were having riots and things like that over their own bloody identity. That's a whole another issue. I'm not going to bloody unpack that now. But anyway, look, if you're still listening to me ramble, I apologise that I've wasted so much of your time, but I'd just like to say thanks for listening. And if anything that I said resonates with you, just shoot us a comment or whatever. I'd love to debate a little bit, or even just have a bit of a conversation over this, because it really needs to be heard. And if you guys can relate, whatever, send it to a friend or whatever. And definitely check out Gary's Economics on YouTube. It's really informative videos. Literally breaks it down so even the layman can understand it, and that's what makes it really good. And even most of the issues he covers, you might think that he's only talking about his country, but literally he even pre-text to all his videos, he generally says like, these are issues affecting everyone, and it's important to talk about it. So anyway, that's been Sick Greek for now. Thanks for listening, and yeah, enjoy the ride. See you guys.